So I am Patty Robinson, and before we get started, please put your names and your campus in the chat, please. This way we just have a sense of who's here. And also, I just want to say welcome very much to our second presentation of Civic Dialogues for this spring semester. We're happy to welcome you, some new, and I see a couple of returning folks. So again, thank you for being here. I'm Patty Robinson. I am the Faculty Director of Civic and Community Engagement at College of the Canyons, and I'm joined by Kimberly Rosenfeld, who is the Chair of the Education Department and Chair of the Women and Gender Studies Department at Cerritos College. We are also very happy to have Rebecca Moonstone here today. Rebecca is with 3CSN, our success networking team for the community colleges. And so we're really happy to have her here. The history of Civic Dialogues really goes back to fall of 2020. And I always tell folks this because some folks may be joining for the first time and they don't know the history. We started out with a grant from Bringing Theory to Practice. We have since then received another grant from Bringing Theory to Practice. And there is a group of us that have been working together from 3 community colleges and 3 CSUs. Originally, we were going to have an in-person event in 2020. Well, we all know what happened in 2020, and we had to shift gears very, very quickly. And as a result, we ended up starting our first Civic Dialogue series as a virtual online presence. We thought it might last 1 semester, but it was so successful. People loved it. Because of 3CSN, we've been able to record these sessions, and they now are in a YouTube repository, which has just been wonderful. So we, again, have been able to bring some of the most engaging and some of the most important and thoughtful speakers and practitioners and researchers in the world of civic engagement to our series. And so when we look at what we're doing, it is comprised of 2 different parts. Our first part is going to welcome our guest speaker today. Our second part, the deep dive, will take part during the second hour. So the first hour, our speaker will present. Our second hour, Kimberly and I will take anyone who's interested, and we will get into a continued dialogue and discussion about some of the things that our speaker is presenting. There are 3 guiding frameworks that we really want everyone to understand that guides our Civic Dialogue series. We're advancing an understanding of the intersection between equity, agency, and civic engagement to promote the public good. We're recognizing civic and community and democratic engagement as a high-impact practice for guided pathways and student success. And we're also leveraging our participants' ability and their own current knowledge to build capacity to innovate for local, national, and global change. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kimberly, who's going to welcome and introduce our very distinguished speaker today, Carrie Kisker.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Yes, I have the privilege of reading Carrie's bio. So I'm going to take just a brief moment to go through a little bit about Carrie and her background. So Dr. Kisker is president of the Kisker Education Consulting in Los Angeles and director of the Center for the Study of Community Colleges. Drawing from her own and others' research, she regularly consults with college leaders on issues related to civic learning and democratic engagement, entrepreneurship and innovation, program and policy development, strategic planning, and accountability. Dr. Kisker holds a BA in psychology and education from Dartmouth College and an MA and PhD in higher education from the University of California, Los Angeles. Dr. Kisker is author of the American Community College book, 7th edition, and with Josie Bass, and written with author Arthur M. Cohen and Florence B. Brouwer. And then a second book, Creating Entrepreneurial Community Colleges, a Design Thinking Approach, is with Harvard Education Press, and The Shaping of American Higher Education, Emergence and Growth of the Contemporary System, and that's also with Josie Bass, with Arthur Cohen. She has written extensively on civic learning and democratic engagement in community colleges, including a 2016 volume of New York Directions for Community Colleges on the topic. Thank you very much, Dr. Kisker, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Patty. I'm really happy to be with you today. I am going to share my screen for a little bit, and but I don't want to talk at you for 45 minutes. So I'm hoping that you will all engage with me in a couple of exercises, and then a discussion really toward the end of my hour with you. So let's go. Oh, I have to figure out how to actually change the screen in PowerPoint now, and here we go. Okay, who am I and why am I here? You've heard my bio, and I'll just sort of give you the cliff notes on that. But essentially, as Kimberly said, I'm a higher education researcher, writer, and consultant. The beauty of my work from my perspective is that I get to, all of my research informs my practice, and all of my practice and consulting work then informs my research. So I really get to straddle both worlds, which is very fun for me. In that capacity, I've worked with community colleges across the country to help implement and strengthen civic programs and practices. And I've also written extensively on, as you heard, the history of higher education, on community colleges, on civic learning and democratic engagement, and other topics. Most recently, and this is sort of the touchstone for our conversation today, I've just finished, literally 2 weeks ago today, sent to the publisher the 7th edition of the American Community College, which many of you may have read, at least portions of, in your graduate school experience. I also helped out on the 6th edition with Art and Florence 10 years ago, but they have both since passed. So this new 7th edition is in many ways drawing on the work we had done together, but a lot of it is very new as well. I'm going to come back to that and we'll talk more about it, but I'm hoping that you will indulge me in a little bit of a warm-up exercise. In another browser on your computer or on your phone or whatever device you have, if you would go to www.menti.com, MENTI, and input the code 5333-0433. And there's a prompt there, a question, and just let's use about a minute and a half for brainstorming. You can submit as many ideas and thoughts as you have. And I will watch the results, but I am not going to share the results quite yet. And by the way, because I'm in screen share mode, I can't see if anyone has a question or a thought. So feel free at any point to just unmute yourself and shout out a question or a thought. But essentially what the prompt is asking you is, what can students gain, in your opinion, from civic learning engagement with democracy? And I'm speaking specifically about campus efforts to engage students in civic learning and democracy. Okay, I'm starting to see some things come through here. And again, I'm cheating because I'm looking at results, but I'm not going to share them with you yet. So please just keep, this is brainstorm mode. Whatever pops into your brain, put it in. Awesome. Okay. Ooh, I like the way everybody's thinking. All right, let's take another maybe 20, 25 seconds. All right. Okay, so you can keep putting in your thoughts if you want. If you're out of thoughts, no problem. I want to go back to this American Community College book. As I mentioned, I've just finished writing the 7th edition. And in it, as with previous editions, we categorize the community college curriculum in 4 major areas. In some ways, it's an artificial separation because we know all of these interact. But we talk about 4 major functions: developmental education, liberal arts education, occupational, and then what we like to call integrative education. We define integrative education as the process of developing a framework on which to place knowledge stemming from various sources, you might say various disciplines, of learning to think critically, of developing values, understanding traditions, respecting diverse cultures and opinions, and I think importantly, putting that knowledge to work. We see integrative education as holistic, not specialized. And we think it exists within many associate degree requirements, but is certainly not encapsulated by them in most colleges. And in our minds, integrative education is as relevant to those seeking occupational preparation as it is to those who are in a general studies or an associate degree program that would transfer to a universities. So you may be thinking, as I have thought, that this concept of integrative education sounds a lot like what we aim to do with the liberal arts education, or in particular, what we aim to accomplish through general education requirements. And you would be right in thinking that. About 70 years ago, the American Council on Education looked at general education in the California community colleges in particular, and they came up with 12 competencies that they thought should be exercised by a generally educated person. So in other words, outcomes of an integrative or general education experience. And they are someone who would be able to exercise the privileges and responsibilities of democratic citizenship. Someone who can develop a set of sound moral and spiritual values by which to guide their life, who can express their thoughts clearly in speaking and writing, who could read and listen with understanding. If I could see all of you, I imagine you'd be nodding and say, yeah, this sounds about right. This is true what we're trying to accomplish in our colleges today. Someone who uses the basic mathematical and mechanical skills necessary in everyday life. Someone who uses critical thinking to solve problems and to discriminate among values. Someone who seeks to understand their own cultural heritage so that they can gain a perspective, as the American Council on Education put it, of their time and place in the world. I would add to that others' time and places and experiences in the world. And they added someone who understands how they interact with their own biological and physical environment so they can adjust to it and work to improve it. So in many ways, these competencies specified 70 years ago parallel the outcomes or benefits of what we would like to see as an integrative educational experience. And so I'm going to test something here. I'm going to change my screen share and let's go back to the results of our little warm-up exercise. So here are your responses to the prompt. What can students gain from civic learning and engagement in democracy? And the bigger the font is, the more times that word or that idea was expressed in your answers. So I'm going to just be quiet for a minute here and let you all have a look at this. And if you feel so inspired to unmute yourself and just let me know, what does this mean to you? What stands out? And in particular, what parallels do you see between that list of competencies of a generally educated person from 70 years ago and these skills or benefits or outcomes from participating in civic learning and democratic engagement today? And I'll sit in uncomfortable silence until somebody has a thought that they feel like sharing.
Carrie, could you possibly go back to the previous slide for just a second?
Sure. Christopher, did you want to make a comment?
Uh, Not necessarily, but I guess I
Okay.
can. And I'm moving around, so excuse me. I'm informal right now, so Fridays are remote teaching, dropping off my daughter. So sorry about my workout gear. But I mean, I was just thinking when I look at these terms that, for young students in particular to feel even the capacity to even be self-informed, that we need to equip them with proper knowledge. So I do see a lot of commonality in these terms with your other definitions. And then once people are properly self-informed, it might lower the cynicism and the mysticism about politics and government, and they'd be able to more actively engage. So I do see some commonality in these terms, like sense of belonging, sense of self, political acumen, social skills. Like these are the types of basic skills that students need to, 'cause it's not even just skills. How do you operationalize those skills? How do you interface with government when it's seemingly so, there's a perception of it as being corrupt, and we have to sort of fight through this apathy. So I think being self-educated and feeling empowered can help you move through that apathy and then engage.
Thank you.
That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Carrie, did you ask us, can you hear me, by the way?
I can, yes.
Did you ask us to comment on how some of these terms might have been in vogue 70 years ago and some might not have been? Did you ask us to do that or no?
I not specifically, but I would welcome that. I generally just asked what stands out to you about either of these lists, and what commonalities do you see or differences among them?
Okay. Yeah, looking at the list, it looks like a lot of them are classical, meaning they have had a lot of enduring value over the decades. Two stand out to me as being a little unique, one being patriotism, which doesn't seem to be in vogue so much today. I chose that word, by the way. And the other one being equity, which is a newer term and probably would not have been intelligible, 70 years ago.
Yeah, that's a great point. I agree with both of those comments. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm looking at this, Carrie, and it's funny because I know on the previous slide, the emphasis on citizenship. And I think today it's kind of going back to what Ara's saying. I was surprised actually, and Ara, I know you said you did that purposely, because I looked at patriotism and I thought, well, that's interesting because you don't see that very often. Even though there is a sense of people wanting to be very prideful of country, but not putting it within that context. And I think even hearing the term citizenship, we look at and deal with it in a different kind of way today than sort of what might have been even 30 years ago, or it's taken on a different kind of context. And so I see this idea of empowerment, good citizens, public good. That's all kind of being wrapped into that in a different kind of way today.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something, Patty, which is that notion of citizen or citizenship is fraught in some ways too. I mean, I write a lot in the book about education for citizenship, and I mean it in the context that I think you all assume it in terms of the agency and the basic knowledge with which to participate in our democracy. But not all our students are citizens. You can act and exhibit citizenship and not be a citizen. So there's some issues with that term right now, and I don't have a solution for them. But yeah, that's very interesting. Any last thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I'll add something about patriotism. As you're talking about it, I was thinking, that word has got conflated with a lot of negativity. The connotation is turned negative on it to almost equate to ethnocentrism. And I think, that's problematic, right? But it's almost turned into this dirty word that it shouldn't be. And I think that kind of goes back to like that concept of citizenship, that concept of, so we're residing all in America right now to be an American and to be proud of our country. But being proud doesn't mean we're putting others down or that we feel that we're better than. but pride is okay. And I think that somehow has gotten a little bit twisted over the years, politically in particular.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And by the way, I'll mention, going back, when Patty asked you, Carrie, to go back to the previous slide, I noticed the 5th of the 7 ideals you mentioned there talked about using methods of critical thinking. And this is a little bit tangential to what we're talking about, I think, but I've lamented many times in speeches I've given elsewhere that it boggles my mind that we in colleges, we don't have courses titled Thinking 101, Thinking 102, or what have you, that we teach people a lot about writing, about reading, about speaking, but we don't teach people much about thinking. I tell my students on day 1 that I am not here to teach you what to think, but rather to teach you how to think. And the fact that thinking and questions have, well, there's methodologies to them, there's biases in them, and I think it's a very important part of a liberal education is to teach people what the thinking process might be.
I agree, and I will just let you give the rest of my talk, Ara, because that's a perfect, perfect segue into what I wanted to do next. What I was hoping our little warm-up exercise would do is to draw out that connection between, I guess there are many connections, but critical thinking in particular, agency, perspective, empowerment, democratic awareness, sense of belonging, all of these things that students gain, we believe, and have seen to be true from our efforts to provide them with civic learning and engagement and democracy experiences. And the overarching general liberal mission of all colleges, not just community colleges. And given that overlap, and this is sort of the key point that we're going to keep returning to, is this question that can we start thinking, given this crossover, can we think about civic learning and democratic engagement as the cornerstone of a community college's integrative mission? And indeed, this is sort of exactly what we have been attempting to the point we're trying to make in the 7th and also the 6th editions of the American Community College, which is that in integrative, that there are 5 pillars of what we see to be an integrative education, really 5 curricular strands that we think, absent a holistic, common integrative approach to general education through which all students gain historical perspective and a sense of the social and environmental trends that affect their future, and a focused work on critical thinking and writing, and until or unless that ever takes center stage. We're sort of conceptualizing an integrative education approach as resting on 5 curricular strands that really currently exist and are thriving already within community colleges. The first of this, of course, Ara, you nailed it, is critical thinking. And there are critical thinking courses titled such, focusing just on such, but fewer than we would like. Although I will say that a lot of courses in English and in the social sciences in particular do incorporate ideas of critical thinking. All right, my screen just went black for a minute. Does everybody else's still working? I'm back.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm not sure what happened there, a little lightning storm in my office. And I think that what's really exciting to me is that there are a lot of people thinking about critical thinking in new ways too. I don't know how many of you have heard about the Education Design Lab's 21st Century Skills and Micro-Credentials and associated digital badges that allow students to develop and receive recognition of competencies in these tiny little areas such as critical thinking, oral communication, collaboration, and so forth. And these micro skills can be embedded into any course in the liberal arts and the occupational areas and developmental education and so forth. The second 2 pillars, I think, of an integrative education are service learning and civic learning and democratic engagement practices that many of you are very aware of in your colleges and others across the country. And in these programs, as you know, faculty and staff are really thinking about how to engage students with issues that are important to them, how to involve them in what we know to be some of the most transformative practices, such as deliberative dialogues, that ask learners to consider the wicked or endemic as opposed to easily solvable problems in our society, to understand issues from diverse perspectives, to listen and engage with others with whom they might disagree, and to connect what they're learning to what they've experienced in their own lives. The fourth pillar is along the same lines, and I think this encompasses a lot of the work that the colleges are doing around sustainable development, environmental stewardship, and climate change. And these areas all provide additional opportunities for integrative learning as they enable students to research and attempt to solve real-world problems, in that they can then apply both to future careers and ideally to the preservation of our planet. And just as with service learning, civic engagement, many of these programs provide opportunities for interdisciplinary and co-curricular collaboration, and enable learners to engage with the causes and potential solutions to really existential problems. Importantly, I think all of these programs offer an opportunity to link disciplinary knowledge to immediate action or agency on the part of students, and longer term work to build students' civic capacity and agency, all of which I really think are central to this integrative ideal of educating for citizenship. Now, the fifth pillar in my mind, and one that was touched on when I think Patty, maybe you called this out, is the notion of equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the really intentional work that colleges are doing around this. So I believe that all of our work in general that provides students with the analytical, the communication, the quantitative, and the interpersonal skills they need to thrive in life and in our democracy are really not if marginalized or minoritized students don't feel like they belong and can succeed on campus and are not included, and their voice is not included in this work. I also think that the impact of all of our other efforts will be minimized if educators aren't providing curricular and extracurricular opportunities for students to wrestle, and faculty and staff, I might add, to wrestle with the notions of bias, discrimination, justice, prejudice, privilege, all of these concepts that can lead to really difficult but necessary conversations. So I think that efforts to enhance equity, inclusion, and belonging on campus really form the connective tissue that bind these other four strands of integrative education together, and ensure that all students really have equitable access to the full range of skills and disposition and knowledge and so forth that we hope our colleges provide. Now, this conceptualization of integrative education is largely theoretical. It's sort of an idea we posit in the book. Maybe it's a thought exercise, if anything, because I think that and I'm interested to see whether you agree, I would think that the best that could currently be said right now is that community colleges offer numerous exceptional opportunities for integrative education. But to my knowledge, few have really put this work at the center of all teaching and learning and used it to create bridges between various curricular emphases, including liberal arts and occupational education. I think in many ways, our efforts around civic learning, democratic engagement, climate change, equity, inclusion, all of these ideas are sort of like a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a centripetal idea that is constantly subverted by these centrifugal forces of the curriculum and of all the various mandates that our colleges respond to. But I want to test that assumption, and if you'll indulge me, we can go once more to menti.com. If you still have it open in your phone or your browser, you can use the same code. I am just going to change the prompt quickly. Okay, so again, if you need it, it's menti.com and the code is 5333 0433. And this time, I am asking you to respond with how the extent to which you agree with 3 statements that all begin with the same bit, which is efforts to engage students in civic learning and democratic engagement are A, central to my college's mission, B, an integral part of my college's curriculum, and C, effectively supported with institutional resources. So I am going to share the results right away with you this time, and we'll see what's coming up. All right, I think we've got just about everybody answering. If not, please take your time and put it in there too. So this is sort of what I was interested to see, is that I had hypothesized, and again, I invite you to unmute and share your thoughts on this too. I had hypothesized, and I think I'm going to be correct, but maybe not as much as I thought I would be, that this first question, that these ideas are central to my college's mission, would be furthest along on our sliding scale toward agree. And then it would sort of go down as these results have too, and that the least the statement least agreed on with it, that it is effectively supported with institutional resources. I'm actually quite interested to see that some of these answers are aligned, or at least similarly aligned in the middle and not all over the map here. And I'm wondering if that's because we have a group of educators who have decided to spend 2 hours on a Friday engaging with ideas of civic learning and democratic engagement and equity in student success. So I invite you to reflect on why you answered the way that you did here, if anything comes to your mind, or what differences you might think if we had an audience from everybody and every institution across the state answering these questions.
So Carrie, I'm happy to start the conversation, because when I saw this, I was going, okay, this doesn't surprise me. I'm actually, I think it's actually a little higher than it probably would be if you had this be a completely, very diverse group of folks not coming with obviously an interest in the topic that we were all here today. But one thing I can say, in looking at that first question, which I think is really important, I think there are a lot of us out there that this is now becoming sort of front and center. I know on our campus, as we're in the process of creating or revising our current strategic plan, this has become a topic that's being discussed in different venues, and it really is now something that is becoming more front and center than I think it ever has in the past. So that's a good thing. And I think what will follow, hopefully, is more of that integration into the curriculum, as well as those institutional resources.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Patty.
Larry has his hand up, Carrie.
Okay, Larry.
So I'm a little more skeptical, Patty. Sorry. And part of it's because, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to leave about halfway through today, but my observation is that we're getting more and more about technical learning, meaning we're connecting with all of our local businesses and technical. We have a great, aerospace program, industry here, and lots of different technical stuff, computers, biometrics, that kind of thing, where they need workers. They don't need somebody that can critically think to address kind of ARIS issues. So they need people that don't take sociology or don't stop and think, and so my concern is this is becoming more and more of what we do and what we do across the country is educate people in a very small slice of what it takes to get work. And it's always great to have, work and have a skill. What I'm worried about is a lot of these folks that come out of high school, they go straight into, these technical training programs and never take a sociology class. They never take a comparative religion class. They never take a critical thinking class or philosophy class or anything like that. And so to me, we're vulnerable because those folks may just sort of whatever they see on TV, but they won't have all those underpinnings that you mentioned in two of those slides, all those different things that you need to make our democracy work. It's like, well, I know I kind of like that idea, so go ahead and do that sort of thing, instead of having gone through the 4 years of critical thinking, like I'm assuming most of us on this Zoom have done. I can still remember sitting around in the cafeteria arguing this philosophy or this or that with my peers, and to not go through that system, I think is kind of dangerous. I guess you call it a liberal education, and yeah, it is, and that was the point of getting free education to all citizens. So, and you don't have to be, quote, a citizen to get that education and be able to contribute in a meaningful and informed way. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but that's my concern. Why I really love this discussion. You're right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I want to come back and respond to that, but I want to invite any other thoughts, either related to what Larry brought up or separate from that.
So, hi, my name is Elizabeth Briley. I'm the Dean of Health Occupations at Cerritos College. And I think to some extent, I would agree that in many of our programs, we are very CTE or career technical education focused. And so we have certificate programs that don't require the general education, the breadth that one would receive in general education, but we also have associate degrees that do require that. And so I think that in some cases, depending on how far they go, they do get that sort of breadth of education and that exposure to critical thinking and learning how to write and how to think through problems in a critical way. I'm a little torn because I feel like there is such a need for career technical education and for students to have a direction or at least a stepping stone to get into the workforce, not only to meet the workforce needs of our state, but also to kind of get them in a situation where they can start earning a good wage and then perhaps step into a lengthier program, go on and get that associate's degree and then maybe transfer. But we have so many students who just really need to get that living wage that has to, it's kind of like balancing, the importance of meeting basic needs and then it's Maslow's hierarchy. We have to get them to a place where they can meet those basic needs with the skills and a job so that then they can move up the hierarchy to reach that state of, self-actualization where they are contributing meaningfully to the democratic process.
Thank you. I love how you said that. Any other thoughts or reflections? Well, I want to thank you both, Elizabeth and Larry, for, again, doing my job for me. But I think you've both touched on something that I think is really, really important. And that is that the community colleges in particular have, and increasingly state colleges and universities, really have this tension between a need to train our future workforce and to provide students who need that first leg up into the workforce first before they can start thinking about other things. And I think we have a responsibility to do both of those things. Now, Would it be great if everybody took the full complement of general education, sociology, philosophy, all these other courses? Eventually, yes, it would. Realistically, that's not happening, and it probably will not happen, although doors should be left open and ladders created to be able to do that over time. So I think really the notion I'm trying to posit here today is, if we are not going to have what had been considered a GE or breadth requirement for all students, especially those in occupational programs, how can we still invite them to develop the muscles that students have historically and are currently in many associate degree programs exercising, right? So in what ways can we bring an integrative education, or at least some tenets of an integrative or general education, to students in all programs? And so that's really my thought experiment for the day, which is, what if we thought about civic and learning and democratic engagement as an opportunity to do that, given that there is such crossover in outcomes and benefits from engaging in these practices, many of which occur through the co-curriculum, the extracurriculum, and not through course requirements too. Now, we could talk for a whole hour about involving community college students, in particular in the extracurricular curriculum and all that entails. But we'll set that aside for now. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint if I can find it. And we've done some brainstorming about what might be possible. We've talked a little bit about that. I want to go straight to all our challenges and barriers to sort of centralizing this idea of civic learning and democratic engagement as a cornerstone of the college's integrative efforts across disciplinary areas, and talk a little bit about what some of the challenges to doing that might be. And I again invite you to unmute and shout it out. I'll just put a couple biggies out on the screen. Took me about 3 seconds to come up with these. It probably wouldn't take much more for you to double or triple this list. But this idea of an integrative education provided through something other than general education or distribution requirements that are inherent in an associate degree or general studies degree, that's a change in the way we're thinking about educating students. And so therefore becomes, the inertia of making that change can be a challenge. Another big issue is university transfer and articulation agreements. I think we can all agree that we need to have these. We need to smooth that transfer process for students, and especially the credit application process. But they also dictate to some extent what we can require our students to do in various programs, occupational or in the liberal arts. Lack of institutional support. There was actually more institutional support in your answers on the previous slide than I had expected, which is fantastic, but it's certainly not enough. I imagine all of you would agree to really make this a central thing. Initiative fatigue. I can't see you nodding or smiling, but I imagine that you are, because it's real. Obviously, human and monetary resources, I guess, goes under support, but we could specify it. Any other barriers to thinking about how we can sort of centralize civic learning and use it as a way to bring these integrative experiences to all students? What else stands in our way of accomplishing something like this?
Ms. Elizabeth, again, I would say that the many demands on our students' time is a barrier. We have students, especially in community colleges, who are juggling and balancing constantly the need to, take care of themselves, support their families, whether it be their family of origin or, their own children that they might have. They're trying to work and go to school, and it's often too much for them. And so to layer on something else, another expectation or requirement, is difficult for them, especially if we're asking them to come to, extracurricular type activities. However, it is those things that help create that support system and that safety net and that sense of belonging that actually makes everything easier for them. So it's kind of it's a catch-22, I suppose.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Carrie, I'd like to add, I know you were talking about institutional support, and I think and I know this is probably part of that, but even kind of digging deeper and saying it's having that support of faculty to get involved in this, particularly through, if you're talking small stipends or professional development or something that shows that the institution is backing this work, not just, oh, this is a good thing, go out and do it.
Yeah.
I also think there needs to be a balance, and this goes back to what Larry was saying. There needs to be a balance between the emphasis on workforce and the emphasis on the civic engagement component. I think too often what happens is that we see, again, and I'm not trying to be critical, but I think that because it is so prevalent particularly in the community college system right now, that the workforce component very much dominates, and we know how important it is, but you have to have that balance. So again, and I hate to use that word buy-in, if you're going to gain the support, if you're going to get folks to understand the importance, they have to see where they fit in this. It can't just be about one side of the house versus the other. There's got to be that joining together so everybody sees, oh yeah, we can do this as a team rather than as two separate kind of entities.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, Patty, I think, I keep thinking these don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? There can be a way, and I go back to like contextualized learning or somewhere where we can take even existing curriculum and work within that existing curriculum to make some of these connections. But again, that's going to take faculty development, faculty, just understanding, kind of like that light bulb moment that, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. And here's how I can do it. And that takes resources and commitment of time and of money. And so that's where we kind of buck up against the system and systemic, challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I realize I've only got about 10 minutes left before I'm turning the floor back to Kimberly and Patty. So I have two discussion questions, and I'm gonna share them both with everybody right away, and then I'll maybe put them in the chat afterwards, and so we can see each other and have more of a real conversation. But the first is, despite all these challenges, which are not insignificant, what might be the benefits of making civic learning and democratic engagement the cornerstone of a college's efforts to really provide integrative education for all students? And it doesn't have to be just civic learning, democratic engagement. You could think about other ways of critical thinking, or in my mind, a lot of the work around environmental sustainability and climate change is really tied into the civic work we do with our students, because it involves agency and application to real world problems and interdisciplinary approaches to learning and that sort of thing. So if we could do this, if we could make all of these ideas sort of the cornerstone across curricular strands of how we're helping our students to think critically and engage with democracy and so on and so forth, what would be the benefits? What would that look like? And then secondarily, if you're going to pull the string a little further, what would it take to begin framing civic learning and democratic engagement in such a way at your college? In other words, how would you start moving from this idea that it could function as a centripetal force into actually taking steps to adjust the way your college functions to think in this way? And I'm going to stop the screen share. I'll put both of those prompts in the chat. But I just wanted to sort of take this idea and throw it back at you and get some initial responses, reflections, excitement. No, that could never work. Why am I wasting my time on a Friday morning? Thoughts?
We have a hand up, Carrie.
Okay, thanks. Oh yeah, sorry, Christopher.
No, I just have a question. When you say what are the benefits, do you mean like what are the practical effects, like hard outcomes, like retention rates would go down or transfer rates would go up? Do you mean like that? Or do you mean something more abstract?
Yes. Any of the above, all of the,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Let me think about that then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I maybe shouldn't have worded the question just in benefits. What would be the outcomes? What would be the effects of thinking about this way? Because it might not all be positive.
Well, I'll start it off. I would say, because I was very much into it. I'm retired from RCC, but getting students involved with this is crucial, in my own opinion. And it's because, as we stated, most students don't feel that they have any segue into that, into civic learning. They don't think that they're able to do something like that. And as you stated, Elizabeth had stated, and then you have so many students that are working and they have to work to keep up with their parents and different things like that. But one of the things, and some of you all probably get tired of hearing me talk about this, but it's like I got the community involved with it. I had the mayor to come in and speak very down to earth and very open to the students. Where were your failures? When did you feel like quitting? And then at what point did you turn around? That's crucial for students to know those things. And then they can say, I do see myself getting involved, and the benefits of it, it boosts morale. And I'm speaking of within themselves. It boosts because I was a SI coordinator, and I involved, not only did I get the mayor, I get city council, I get the chief of the fire department, police department, many, many different types of people out there within our community to come in and talk with the students, but not just talk. I also prefaced it with the community people and said, okay, what can you do for these students to make not just your talk, just a talk, but give me some actions, give me internships where they can work with you or work with other people within your department so that they can understand and they'll see. And to see that happen, and I'm not telling you every single student will flourish in this way, but 90% of the students that I had flourished, and they've gone on and saw themselves in other areas other than just the norm, if you will. You know, so I think it's crucial. I don't see a downside to it personally, because I never saw the downside of it. I only saw the benefits.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
I'm seeing a few things in the chat.
Yeah.
Ara says the benefits. Students would have a sound perspective on the purpose of getting educated. I like that. And what would it take to sell all faculty members on the value of opening the first day of each semester with a clarion call to the benefits of civic learning and democratic engagement? It's a fantastic idea. Just position that right from the start. I love that. Jesse, do you want to talk about your experience?
Sure, yeah. And hopefully you can hear me. I apologize. I've been cutting in and out. I'm in a parking lot somewhere connected to a random sandwich shop's free Wi-Fi. So if you can hear me,
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. Yeah, I work with Patty. I don't know if there's any students here. I highly doubt it, but as a lone representative, me and Patty have discussed at length the ultimate question: why aren't more students participating in the civic engagement process? And I think there's a number of factors, and I think a lot of times we keep on bringing up the same potential issues, and I almost want to say they're more cop-outs than real legitimate answers. And I say that as, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I have a child, I have a business, I have a house and bills that I pay for, and I still go to school and I still engage in the process. So I try to figure out why aren't other students that have less requirements. And I'm not going to I don't mean to say that to put down other students, but I feel like if students really want to pursue civic engagement, and more specifically democratic engagement, as you say, I think the real issue is we need to find a way to tell students this is an actual opportunity for you, because I think there's a misconception that the only way to get into politics or public policy is to just get your degree in public policy and be involved in the political science department, which is the furthest thing from the truth. I myself, last month, I went to Sacramento and spoke with all my legislators about public policy that I put together myself, a bill proposal. And there was no involvement from the poli-sci department from start to finish. This was pretty much just me and Patty. So it was purely piggybacking on our civic engagement department. So in conclusion, what I think is that from its core, we need to find a better way to tell students this is what civic engagement is. This is why it's important, and here's how you can get involved, because then you can start getting into the nitty-gritty ultimate question of students saying, well, my vote doesn't count, so why would I even bother? Where once you start knocking down those hurdles, I think they're really going to have a light bulb moment to say, you know what, I think I can be involved, and I think I can change things, not just for my community and my campus, but for my own well-being as I pursue my degree, whatever it may be. And so that's just, I don't know if that's the answer per se, but that's just some things I've recognized as me and Patty alone have put on events. And you go, where's everyone? You know, where are the students? We've brought in our congressperson on campus. We've brought in all of our elected officials on campus, and students rarely come. And you think, what, do I need to bring Joe Biden? If we invited Joe Biden on campus, would students come then? Gavin Newsom, would they come then? I don't know. So I think there's a more core thing that we need to identify. And I think it really is clear communication with students about what civic engagement really is and why it's important and why they should be a part of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
They might come to get a selfie if I think everything you said, Jesse, is great, and the things that Ara said also. One of the things I'm noticing with students is they're kind of waiting for somebody else to make a difference. You know, well, they'll either blame the boomers for the problem, or they're waiting for the boomers because they think the boomers are in charge, you know. And one of the things that kind of I've noticed kind of turns the light bulb on. I go, you know how old John Lewis was when he started. You know how old Martin Luther King was. You know how old Gloria Steinem. You know, all these people you start naming, and like, well, who do you think won World War II? You know, they were all 18 and 19 and 20 years old. So you start thinking about, well, what are you waiting for? You know, we messed up, so to speak. We did great, but, you know, I'm a little older, so I get, you know, the civil rights movement, women's lib, LGBTQ, you know, all the stuff that, you know, the war and all the stuff that we sort of accomplished to sort of environmental, to sort of move the ball forward. But there's so much left to do, and it's not going to, if they're waiting for us, whoever us is, to do it, no, it just takes a few. And as Jesse said, it doesn't take a political science major. It's good to have that, but it just takes a person to get, you know, to get involved or to get organized, you know. The other thing is that you don't get that inspiration from taking some classes. If you get some inspiration from a professor that says, hey, there's a reason why, you know, you're taking this class, the reason why you're in college, you know, this part of it is to get a job. Yeah, perfect. You know, but the other is to learn how to think and to figure out what's going on and what you can do to sort of help, you know, empower people to vote, but not just to vote, but also to get involved in an organized sort of way.
And Carrie, I'm just going to jump in here one last thing too. I also think that, you know, so much of this is also thinking in terms of many of our students in the community college system will remain in their communities. And so the more that we can do to get them to become good citizens, responsible citizens, they're going to give back to our communities. And I think the other component that we haven't even brought into this is also how do we connect with those partners. We talked about making those business connections, but what about those connections that aren't with businesses, but with nonprofits? And so all the good work that they're doing, how do you now get to see that kind of connection and that civic responsibility that we can get our students connected to as well?
Yeah. Thank you, Patty. I'm going to say thank you to all of you for indulging me in this conversation around a topic that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I really value your participation and your insights. And I will, with that, turn it back to Kimberly and Patty, and I'm happy to stick around at least for half an hour if the conversation continues. And but I will take a back seat. Thank you again for inviting me to come.
Thank you very much, Carrie. We really appreciate you being here today. And just I'll do a shameless plug. Her book is, you can pre-order it now on Amazon. I already have. So I'm looking very much, and I'm very looking forward to when I can receive it, because I remember I've looked at an earlier edition and it's a fantastic book, and I can only imagine what it's going to be like now with all of this new sort of connection to what's happening currently. So thank you. So Kimberly, I'm going to turn it over to you to transition us into the next hour.
Yeah, so we invite everyone to stay and continue the conversation. If you cannot, that's fine. If you can stay 15 minutes, that's fine. This is very casual part of the discussion now. And I'm going to open a shared document in a minute. And what I usually ask folks to do is just give everyone about 5 minutes just to get some general reactions down and some thoughts on that. And then we will either stay as a large group or go into some breakout rooms to talk about these things a little bit more in depth. So give me just 1 second to get you all the link to, I was having such a great time. I usually open it, but I was very involved in the conversation and I did not remember to get that all queued up. So let me do it now. It'll be just 1 minute here. Okay, here it is. Okay, we are on March 10th. And you're going to see here a place to sign in. First and foremost, I want to make sure you all have access. Yes, okay. And I'll screen share this too. Here it is. There's a link. Hopefully you'll see that. And I'll show you here. Okay, hopefully this is what you're all into. And if you scroll here, I'm going to scroll past the framework. Patty already read that. I'm just going to scroll down to the sign-in sheet. So we just get you to sign in and then share a comment about the previous hour, something that stood out or got you thinking, raised a question or a concern that surfaced. It's really just to ground you if we put you in breakout rooms so that you have a point to start the conversation from. And those of you who are steeped in the community colleges, you know we're all about guided pathways in a lot of our conversations. And so while you're doing that, I'm going to scroll here just to remind you if there's any ways that you want to put your reflection or frame it within the guided pathways pillars or framework that's so embedded in our campuses now. We have this graphic here reminding you of the pillars, clarifying the path for students, helping them to enter a path, to stay on their path to completion and to ensure that they're learning. So maybe if there's a way or connections you can make here in the conversation, that would be interesting to hear. And then when we go into breakout rooms, we have a little area to take some notes here as well, because we usually do report out. So I'm going to give you just a couple more minutes to get your thoughts in, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. So let's see, I'm going to type myself some thoughts. Okay, Patty, do you want to lead us into our larger discussion? I'm going to share my screen. I know our group barely got notes in the last 2 minutes.
Oh, you know what? And we didn't even put any. Oh, I was writing things down, but I didn't put anything into the actual document.
That's okay. It's all right. Yeah. So I don't know which group wants to start. And we have our spokesperson. I don't know. Ours is Ara. How about you, group 2?
You know, we didn't actually select a person, but I think, no, I was taking notes, but I think John was fantastic. John, would you feel comfortable talking?
Not at all. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
You are so articulate in putting this all together, and so I think you are like the best representation of
Oh,
this.
thank you.
So-
So in terms of notes, I hate to be the one to say it wasn't all output from me, but I think the idea is that the team was talking about this idea that the effort needs to be coordinated, you know, among leadership at the college, not just administrators, faculty, but also student leaders. And when you can start small, you know, the idea with multimedia and what we're doing on our campus is it's very scalable. You know, you can be as small as a single class, you know, like a sociology class. Everybody's got a phone, you know, everybody has some sort of mobile device, and YouTube is free. So if you take resources that are free, that are familiar to the student and to the instructor, and you engage in a very small level, a project, you start small and you grow from there. But it's that reward is you have the recording of the event, the actual participation of the students and faculty. And you also can, you know, document it as you go, your formative and summative kind of reports and feedback. But for us, what seems to be most successful is to align the mission and a lot of the objectives that are part of civic engagement with other initiatives on campus that are also strategic. And I identified that career education is another targeted area because at our school, we have a media arts program. And, you know, it's pretty substantial, but you don't have to have a media arts program at your college to be able to do the same thing. Because really these tools are off the shelf, they're available to everybody. And these days, colleges now are bundling software, you know, like video editing and, you know, Microsoft Office and cloud storage. You know, it's taking these tools that don't cost anything and doing something with it, and that empowers students and faculty and really starts that synergy. And so lastly in the notes, I was just mentioning that aside from academic programs and divisions, you can also engage students through ASG, you know, and the student government. And usually that's where you find the leadership. And so it's leadership within clubs, CTE, or within specific classes. I think really that's where you get the most traction at the beginning, and you start small, basically.
And Kimberly, just to sort of preface what John is talking about, because he has some very specific examples that are great coming out of the world of media arts, entertainment. But when we started talking about this, one of the things that really became quite apparent among our group was that there's an issue of language. You know, the civic engagement, the term, you've got students who don't really know what it means, or they think only in terms of politics, but you've also got faculty who don't really know what it means. And again, they think only in terms of maybe politics, and they don't think in terms of the bigger umbrella. So we really have an issue with terminology that I think as a field, we all need to figure out how we can address that. I know we also talked about how maybe they're coming back to that idea of bringing something up on the first day of class. You know, how as a group that this really gets out there. At the end of our conversation, there was the idea of maybe having a campus-wide challenge where, you know, you are getting all departments to do something that brings civic engagement, some aspect of it into your work. And then it was interesting because there was the connection, and I know she had to leave, but one of our folks talked about the idea of she said, you know, I teach computer networking, and my students just want to learn the technical skill and get out. But then something came up about, you know, connecting to real world experiences, and this is very much what John has done and other folks from media arts. And, you know, when I heard her, I said, well, gosh, think about having that connection to AI and all the stuff that's happening right now. And then it was like, oh, wow, now, you know, you start to make that connection. So that I think is a big part of what we need to do. And again, going back, we may be in very different kinds of disciplines, but you can get those disciplines connected, that interconnection, and making those kinds of assignments that students are working on, make them real world. And that's where there's that connection.
Oh, and Patty, can I just make the one more add? It was the other, it just reminded me of what I was mentioning was among disciplines, we use different languages, right? For us, it might be civic engagement. For CE, it's strong workforce. You know, they have a whole initiative that's backed by grants and Perkins funding and whatnot. And the idea is if you look at the objectives, they're so similar and that they basically they rely on each other. And what ends up for working for us is that the content that we produce is not really the main goal in CE, it's the technical skill attainment, but the content comes from the sociology, from the students in the other disciplines, humanities. And so they become the writers, the thinkers that come up with the plot and the storyline. And then our technicians basically realize that through the media. And so that becomes the synergy for us. And you don't have to have a media arts program, but if you take the essence of what that synergy is offering, it's getting students, meeting them on their level with the technology that they're familiar with, and raising the stakes by giving them content, giving them a context to work from. And that's what these project-based learning assignments basically are comprised of. We also do, in addition to the podcasting, we do animation, and we're starting to get into documentary filmmaking. And so those are just a couple of different products and initiatives. I could think of the campus, you could do something really amazing either through ASG or through a civic engagement project campus-wide that leverages a tool like TikTok, you know, where you say, hey, let's catch random acts of kindness on campus. And, you know, whoever can do the most, you know, and you have a college site to post to, or you do a hashtag so they're all linked together. And then you build this library of all these events that are happening on campus, and you realize, and you can apply that to anything basically, but you're leveraging tools that are familiar to students that are often seen as outside of curriculum, but now you're really contextualizing and making it part of the curriculum.
That's great. You guys went in an interesting direction, very different from our group. So I love that. So I'm going to turn it maybe over to Ara if you want to kind of go through some of our points, or if there's any other thoughts before we do, please share. Oh, okay, Ara. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I always do that for some reason. So our group consisted of myself and Christopher and Juan, and Kimberly joined us. And we began by talking a little bit about the 5 pillars that Carrie had in her excellent presentation. The fifth one was equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we pivoted to a question I had put in the earlier exercise about inclusion. In particular, I was mulling over the notion of inclusion and wondering just how sustainable and how pragmatic is inclusion. It's certainly a great ideal. And I shared a story. I'm doing consulting work here at Intel over in Arizona right now. And I noticed just the other day, I mentioned a little party that was being had by a small group of custodian staff. And I don't know any of the custodian staff except for one particular individual. And he's a bit of an oddball. He's an unusual person. He's clearly got some issues. He's not a bad guy. He's not a mean guy. He's not unpleasant. He's actually very pleasant, but he's odd. And I'm always very friendly with him and stuff. I noticed that there was 2 tables, one very small table for this party and a slightly larger table. The slightly larger table had 8 people in it, and the one table had him in it. And I didn't see how this played out. I didn't see how it got set up. I didn't see the origins or genesis of it, but I didn't like the optics of it. It made me feel he was excluded. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe he wanted to be like that. Maybe it just was the luck of the draw. He came a little bit late, you know, I don't know, but I know I didn't like the way it looked because I know he is an oddball and I felt like he was being singled out. I acknowledge I might be wrong, but there's an example of what I think inclusion ideally tries to prevent from happening. So that's the good thing about inclusion. The challenging thing about inclusion we talked about, and Christopher had some great feedback for me. Juan did as well about, I mentioned the Fairfax County School District back in about 2015 or so. They had changed their sex education to start to account for transgender issues, and they made the point in their rewriting of their policy statement that we want everyone to, we want to have an approach to this subject based on inclusion. And so I proffered the thought that they might be coming up against an impossible ideal to attain, because if you have a group of people that look at gender as fluid, which is what they were specifying in their policy statement, that's one position. If you have another group of people that see gender as binary, strictly binary, you now have a very different worldview. And if you put the two groups together and you include them both, what do you get? Do you get World War III? Or do you end up making it easy on yourself by excluding the group that you think is bigoted or what have you? Christopher pointed out, again, using idealistic terms, that we want to strive, of course, for respect, for empathy, for understanding. You may not always agree, but if we can at least have a healthy dose of respect, and maybe even an openness to the point that we might come to understand another perspective, that would be a great thing. Kimberly contributed a great point about her own teaching experience. I forget, Kimberly, if the class you were referring to was public speaking or debate, or what was it?
Debate,
Okay.
debate. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she would instruct her students that when you're going to go through this educational endeavor here on the discipline of debate, I am going to have you take a position that you want, and also not only argue for that position, but I'm going to also ask you to make a second presentation that argues against your own position. And she pointed out that for some people that is very unnerving. In fact, for some it brings them to tears. I think they'd make great lawyers if they learned how to do that well. That's what great attorneys do: argue both sides and in their private offices before they ever walk into court. It's a great, healthy, liberating thing to do. But in any event, that was one of the things we discussed. We also discussed a little bit about social media, and I forget if Juan or Christopher brought this up. In fact, I'm a little bit stymied here. Can one of you jump in and maybe
Sure.
Paul here?
Yeah, right. I was just bringing up how in the presentation, great presentation, by the way, that one of the things that maybe we can look or think more critically about is how social media interfaces potentially with this model we're trying to consider, this integrative, sort of progressive democratic citizenship model for college campuses. Just because the reality is something like upwards of 95 to 98% of students, at least at our campus, from 18 to 25, are part of social media. So they're part of these platforms, and we have to consider the effects of social media. And I alluded to some psychological research that suggests some of the more, deleterious effects of social media, and how we need to consider this as well when we rethink what citizenship means on campus and how to instill these civic skills.
Yeah,
that was the gist of it.
And either Juan or Kimberly, did you recall anything else maybe from the notes, Kimberly, you typed that I failed to mention?
Yeah, Juan had mentioned censorship as a result of, and I don't know if you want to jump in, Juan. We kind of started to talk about, Juan's unmuting, let Juan kind of go into it.
Because we were talking about respect, right? And what I mentioned was that we need to teach our students to have respect to the subject matter, if not to the professor, at least to the subject that is being taught.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Good.
Yeah, and which got into discussions of speakers at college campuses that are canceled or not allowed to speak, or they try to show up, but they don't, people drown them out with protests or whatever it might be. And, we kind of got into that whole philosophical discussion of what is higher ed if it's not to be exposed to diverse opinions, as long as it doesn't cross into hate speech, that we should be able to hear these speakers, and if it's for nothing else, to critique them. And, but somehow we're losing that. And I think it ties into what Christopher's saying about social media. That's an actor there in some of this polarization, which plays out civically in how we, the citizenry thinks, votes, what they're willing to listen to, what they're willing to expose themselves to. We have that research on filter bubbles, right? Eli Parrish, quite a few years ago, talked about filter bubbles, where people now get feeds that just reinforce their political views, and they're not exposed to that other side. And, one thing I've seen is when a student does have to argue both sides of an issue, sometimes they change their original position. And then sometimes they develop stronger empathy for the other side. They may not change their position, but they have a new way of looking at that other side. And I think these are critical skills. I think they're critical for civic engagement, for democracy.
Yeah.
But I do see where they're slipping away, at least in this contemporary moment right now, with professors afraid of losing their jobs if they invite the wrong speaker, or they kind of have the wrong topic that gets debated. And the wrong, who decides on wrong? Who decides on right? Right. And that is shifting too. And it gets into like these very complicated, discussions around what does it mean to be educated? What does it mean to get to that point of being educated? How do we get there? In today's contemporary kind of, we have these flashpoints of hot buttons that you're not supposed to touch. And I think it stifles growth. Yeah.
And I can add something, the thing is, the world is not the United States. So you see what I'm saying? Not all the world is at the level of the United States. And some of our students do think that the world is the United States. And what would happen to them once they go to another country? They're going to be culturally shocked.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're not even preparing them to be world citizens because we're making them believe they live in a bubble.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I think it really behooves us as professors to make sure we don't live in a bubble. I know I've traveled to 46 countries so far, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface, which is true. If you look at the number of countries that are out there, I have barely scratched the surface. But I remember, I'll just tell one little anecdote that I think is really important, this whole thing of hate speech and all that. And hate speech is sometimes used as a cudgel inappropriately, claimed hate speech, which for some people means any speech I don't happen to agree with. But I remember one time I was about to show something very controversial. Well, wasn't controversial to most of my students, but it was a cartoon. I was discussing the cartoon of Muhammad, that caused the people in France, that publication to get all shot up and all that. And I was about to show that picture, and I noticed there was a Muslim student in my classroom. So before class started, I grabbed him and took him outside, and didn't literally grab him, but I summoned him outside, and I told him what I was about to do. And I said, how will you, I don't know how devoted you are to Islam, but how will you react if I show that? And he said, you're welcome to show it if you want to, but I will not like it if you do. And I'd rather excuse myself and wait outside until you finish showing it. I made the decision not to show it for that reason. And normally I wouldn't not show it. Normally, something like that, I would normally not censor myself. But in this case, I looked at the individual and I thought, I'm going to adversely affect this student if I do that. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't thinking he's going to come back and try to kill me. But I thought, this will have an adverse effect on this student. It might impact the rest of his learning this semester. So I didn't show it. And in the end, my not showing it had a profound effect on the student. I mean, he came back the next week with a beautifully written letter that he'd written to me. And I just found that, this is like 10 years ago, I just found that letter just the other day in a move, and I reread it and I was touched by the things he said. He had told his whole family and his relatives about it. They were all, deeply moved by that. He also brought me this Middle Eastern candy, which was awful, but I pretended I liked it. I thought there was a case where that would have been seen as hate speech by him. And even though I did not agree, I don't think it's hate speech at all, but I'm not Muslim. I don't know what it's like to look at Muhammad the way he looks at Muhammad. So I just decided not to show it. And I think that had a positive outcome. Sorry if might be tangential. I apologize.
No, and also, I don't know if you guys read that a report came out about that, we were being trained to use trigger warnings. If we were going to talk about a delicate subject, right? Trigger warning,
right?
For the students. But I don't know if you heard the report that just came out that actually by saying trigger warning, it actually has a more negative effect on the student.
The very term is a trigger warning.
Term of it already triggers them.
Good God.
I don't know if you heard the report came out, by 12
Yeah.
specialists saying,
I did.
what, we have made studies about this. This actually makes the student even worse by saying trigger warning.
I
Yeah,
tell
what-
them in my syllabus, I don't do trigger warnings, although I guess I did that day with the Muslim student.
Yeah, I always say, like, when I'm speaking with my fellow instructors, that I think the key thing pedagogically to think about is always to frame the context of the issue you're about to speak into or about. If you can frame the context appropriately, I think in most cases you can communicate these issues, even subject matter that might be potentially controversial, but being able to define that context, and I think that's where our skill comes out, especially on this issue, is a way where we can meet a happy medium, I think, and be able to talk about these subjects and have the type of dynamic discourse that we need to have in college classrooms that's not censored, but respectful.
Yeah, I think your example are as of respect. And if it didn't hurt the curriculum to leave it out,
Yeah.
which it doesn't sound like it did,
It did not,
students can
yeah.
go look it up on their own. You can say, I'm not going to show this out of respect for our, our other students. But if you're interested, you can look this up on your own, and then you can continue with whatever you were about to say with it. But it reminds me a lot of like teaching that nuance to students too. I never forget a student who came in and had this speech on the dolphins, when they fish. And she just had all these graphic pictures of these mutilated dolphins that really bothered the class. And I mean, I was looking away and I thought, oh, why did she feel the need to put these images in here? And, so this was way before trigger warnings, but I think I mentioned to the class that, hey, if you feel the need to show something like that, you may want to let people know there's going to be some graphic imagery of dolphins here. And please, you may want to leave, or I invite you to leave if it bothers you. Something to kind of let them know. And, I learned that over the years through experience and students bringing in visual aids and stuff. Sometimes they want that emotional reaction though, right? It was a persuasive speech. She wanted us to go do something about dolphins who are getting mutilated by these fishing nets and so on. Just how you go about doing it. Sometimes you have to really think about that respect and that empathy piece.